Hello everyone, a very good morning from Madrid, and today I'm covering the latest round of China-U.S. trade talks. I'm Jianhua, correspondent for CGTN. I've been covering this event across Europe for a couple of months already. And now, behind me in that building, I believe you can see that is Spain's foreign ministry. The Chinese delegation, the American delegation have been talking for about 3 hours and a half. And of course, for this round of talks, TikTok will be on top of the agenda. It is one of the sticking points that I would like to address. And of course, I'm not alone today. I would like to introduce my colleague, Ken Browne, who has been covering this event from day one. Ken, say hi, please.
Hi everyone, bienvenidos a Madrid. Welcome to Madrid. We're here at the beautiful Spanish capital. And a very important meeting happening right here behind us, as you say.
You're
Talks
based
are ongoing.
here.
I'm based there. I live here, so I've been helping them find all the best local food.
Okay, so we're going to talk about the food and population properly, and then we're going to talk about
Straight to business.
something really serious, straight down.
That's
to
Jianhua,
business.
straight to business.
Yeah, that is me. But first, tell me, how do I say thank you in Spanish? Maybe I found this, a little bit challenging for me to get around speaking English. Gracias, and what is?
Hola.
Hola, and gracias.
Hola,
okay,
gracias.
and sorry.
Sorry, lo siento.
Lo siento.
Perdón.
Okay, that's a good, very, very good
Starting with a
start.
free Spanish class.
Okay, very good start. Sorry about that. But anyways, we'll be talking about the trade talks, and then we have been manning that position and believe that from the camera, I have 2 cameras here. You can see there is the media pool there, and we have lots of colleagues there. And we have been here for about 2 days now, right?
Yesterday
the talks lasted about 6 hours.
About 6 hours, yeah. They began at around 2:25 p.m. local time. They finished at around 8:20. So just before 6 hours, they came out. But I think what was very interesting about TikTok is that they said that the principal negotiators came out. So the top guys, people like Scott Bessent, the U.S. Treasury Secretary, He Feng, the leader of the Chinese team, they ended around that time. But the technical teams continued throughout the night, and you heard some news from Bessent and from Jameson Greer today.
You know what, that is what they do. Usually the 2 principals would finish the discussions first. They would set the tone for the teams to continue the discussions at technical level. So this finished around 8 something local time here. So about 6 hours time, and then they continued into night. I heard they were writing reports just inside the building. And then Scott Bessent, the US Treasury Secretary, left that building telling reporters that we will continue tomorrow. We'll start again tomorrow, basically. That's what he said. And this morning, we were surprised that the whole US delegation just walked up the road after meeting the Spanish ministers of economy and foreign affairs. I believe you have interviewed them before.
They must be staying
They spoke
close.
to us. They spoke to us for about 5 minutes time. And we like that. We like more interaction with the principals. And they told us about what they talked about. Basically, the talks were fulsome, and they have already made some progress, or in his words, good progress.
Yeah.
And technical details.
And mostly about TikTok. It feels like the talks are really centered on TikTok because you have a deadline coming up on Wednesday, September 17th. And we know what both sides want here. The United States have talked for a long time about how they want TikTok to be under U.S. ownership. That goes back to the Joe Biden presidency. And it was actually the current U.S. president, Donald Trump, who's had 3 different extensions to that so far.
Multiple extensions already, and you know what? The time is quite sensitive. You know the deadline, the current deadline for TikTok's operation in the United States is the 17th of September. They will finish the talk today, hopefully, and then they have 1 day. I think they need to ring their presidents to have the sign off whether they're going to have another extension or they're going to have a deal. But we don't know. But what Scott Bessent today said is, even if there is not an agreement, that wouldn't affect the overall China-U.S. relations. That sort of thing.
Yeah, that was really interesting. I mean, he said it twice also. He said that if we do not get a deal on TikTok, that will not affect the relationship, that they have the utmost respect for their for the Chinese team, for their counterparts, which is interesting in itself as well, because there seems to be kind of two gears, a dual dynamic happening here, where you have certain U.S. institutions trying to put pressure on. We saw on Friday that 23 Chinese companies were put on an entity list, which means that they'll have certain restrictions on exports, for example, and that was a day before these talks. But whenever they come to these talks, it's all respect, and we're going to, they speak candidly, they have a good relationship, and they emphasize that. So we have, a kind of a dual dynamic happening.
But you know what, Scott Bessent spoke to the media this morning for about 5 minutes, and we asked they took like 3 questions, including one from CGTN from me. So I asked him whether there will be another extension, and Scott Bessent said that really depends on the talks today. And he also said that President Donald Trump had a comment on that, and Trump said, we may let it die, we may, but that really depends. And that, Scott Bessent's rhetoric is very much in line with Donald Trump's rhetoric last night. So they may have another, we don't know, another extension, or maybe they have a deal. If they don't have a deal, they wouldn't want to affect the overall relations. You know what he said? The relations are really good at the highest levels. That's just what he said. I have my notebook here. Jameson Greer, the U.S.
Great for the notes.
Yeah, I know.
I'm always on the phone.
Jameson Greer, the U.S. trade representative, also jumped in. He said we also talk about some other general issues like trade, of course. And he said there was a huge trade imbalance between the world's 2 largest economies. They have been trying to address those issues for a few months, for a long time actually. Not only among the in the talks. And you have been covering that from day one.
Yeah, I was there in Geneva for the ice-breaking talks. I think in terms of tension, that was really the tensest moment, because if you think back to that moment, you had tariffs of 145%, 125% from the Chinese side, which effectively were an embargo between the world's 2 largest economies. And look at the turmoil it caused for the global economy. This is the most important relationship in economic terms, the world's 2 biggest economies. So I remember there was a funny moment where we were waiting. Anyone who wants to become a journalist, get ready to wait a lot. You stand around waiting a lot.
We do.
It's not all excitement and live television.
So you covered the first one.
Yeah.
The second one was in London. You were not there. I was there. So I covered 3. You covered 3 too. You did the first one in Geneva, and then I did the second one in London, and the third one in Stockholm. We did it together at the very end of July, and now we're doing this together one again. So in London, you were talking about, if you want to become a journalist, you have to wait. You have to stand in the queue for a really long time. How long we just stood outside the building where they talked in the Lancaster House in London. 17 or 18 hours. Yeah, that is what you do. And also, we would like to,
buy a good pair of shoes. Buy a good pair of shoes.
A pair of good shoes. And you know what? And you have to work out a lot, I think. Because usually those talks are held behind closed doors. You don't have any information until they have a statement or a press release, or probably a press conference in some cases. You would like to doorstep them.
Yeah.
And then you would like to know what is really happening, probably just a one-word, fulsome or fruitful, good talks, even bad.
It's been very vague. We've had a lot of vague statements. But I remember when we were in Geneva, for example, the tension is really high at the world's 2 economies, and we were waiting outside. We hadn't had any word from inside. We didn't know what they were talking about or how the talks were going. And suddenly we saw some of the delegation leave, and immediately someone tweeted or someone posted that the talks had fallen apart.
It's always quite
talks had fallen apart. That went viral, and it wasn't the case. They had gone for lunch. They'd gone out for lunch. So, Geneva was really the icebreaker. We had the tariffs were lowered from 145, 125 to 10% and 30%, and that, you saw the stock market soar that day.
Speaking of that, it was quite a roller coaster experience. And people just supporting, a lot of cheap stock, and then they were waiting, they were bidding to sell them again. So the stock market has been reacting rather strongly all through the past few months, we have to say, right?
Of course, as we say, the world's 2 biggest economies.
But you know what? I'm still waiting to see the framework they reached in London. I still didn't get to see that. That was one of the questions that we asked them. We doorstepped the principles on both sides, and ask them when do we get to see the framework that they have a breakthrough in London, but still no, and they have been expanding the topic. Do you think that they have been talking about, they have been using this as the mechanism to talk about extensive other topics apart from trade? They're talking about something else, like politics.
I think there's a lot on the table here. I think that they're using this as a way to communicate with each other on many different issues. We talked about how this has become a sort of a successful communications mechanism. That's what Geneva was all about, was getting these a way to speak to each other beyond the existing sort of communication mechanisms in the global system. So if there is one success to come out of these talks so far, it's the fact that we have this kind of means of communication between China and the United States, between the world's two biggest economies. So
you know what? So we are live on all CGTN platform and trying to check if we have got any comments. And this is CGTN broadcasting live from Madrid. Just a recap, and we have been covering the China-U.S. trade talks and have been monitoring our social media account to see if you have any comment, if you have any questions, just let us know, and we'll be here to answer your questions. Yeah. Oh, I can see us here on Facebook now. So the first round, the second round, the third round in Stockholm, both of us were there. It was, how did you feel about that round of trade talks in Stockholm compared to the first two rounds? The first one was turning point, as you said, in Geneva. It reduced tariffs effectively, massively, from over 100% prohibitive to 10 and 30. And the second one, they had a framework.
Yeah.
And then the third one, they had an extension.
Yeah, I mean,
they
the third
did
one
have an extension right after the talks. They
waited an extra day, didn't they? There was
it was a day before the headline.
Feeling,
it was
wasn't
a
there,
day before the deadline. Yeah.
Because we had the framework in London and we thought, okay, this is progressing. Stockholm, they said that they were fleshing out that framework, they're putting more detail into it. But again, not a huge amount of detail for us to tell you. They didn't show us the framework, they didn't show us any of the detail that had happened. Again, we got some pretty vague statements, really. But you have to remember here that we're talking about a trade deal. If you talk to economists, as we've interviewed economists, they will tell you that a proper trade deal can take 10 years to implement. So this is a detailed, complex thing that is going to take time.
It is. I mean, it takes a lot of time. Remember, the trade war between China and the United States started way back to 2018. It's been like 7 years now. So they tried to work it out. It started to deteriorate at the end of 2019, and then they decided to sit down and we need to talk it out because the world's two largest economies that really need each other. I think we couldn't emphasize more. And then they tried to finalize the phase one deal, remember? And it kicked in 2020. It took them how long? Like more than a year to finalize phase one deal. And then we know what happened. COVID. And then international trade came to a halt. And then President Donald Trump came back to the White House in January this year, and then another round of trade war between the world's largest economy, not only with China, but with the rest of the world apparently. Yeah, so it seems like this is such a tumultuous time. Absolutely. I have to say. And then
politically,
the delegations,
in every sense.
the delegations now to talking in that building, trying to figure out what they can do to reduce the tension. But seems like they don't want to show any sign of weakness.
Yeah,
they don't want to.
Yeah, and I mean, going back to your point about how the two sides need each other. I mean, that is the truth. When we had this essential trade embargo, the United States, you know, we had a lot of commentators say that there was a realization that they need the rare earth minerals from China. China needs the chips for their AI growth from the United States. From NVIDIA, you know, there were certain chips that were made for the Chinese market, and even those were put under embargo. So, you know, both sides need each other, and these talks are all about trying to get to a point where, you know, it's a win-win relationship.
That's right. And after the second round of trade talks in London, China's rare earth minerals started to flow into the US market in volume, and China also could buy H20 from NVIDIA, the chip company. But you know what? The latest development is China has launched this result of the preliminary investigation into NVIDIA. NVIDIA, according to that report, has violated the antitrust law in China. So they are trying to launch some further investigation into this company. So it is getting really complicated and tricky at this point, and the two parties are still talking inside that building. You talked about the 23 companies from China being added to the entity list against the Chinese companies' interests, according to Beijing. 13 of the companies out of the 23 are semiconductor companies. And China launched the anti-dumping investigation to US chips, certain types of IC chips, integrated circuit chips. What is IC chips? And I just Googled it, I'm not an expert on that. So analog IC chips refer to those chips that can, change and fine-tune continuous signal. Something like if you want to dim the light slightly, at your home, you need those chips. So I was like wondering if that was hurting like GPU chips, like what NVIDIA provides. Not really, but today, the second day of the talks, NVIDIA probably is a problem. So we'll see what happens. And anti-discrimination investigation into the US restrictions on China's semiconductor sector. So there is a lot going on. They're trying to exchange a lot of,
There's an action, there's a reaction, and those two investigations that you just mentioned happened after the 23 Chinese companies were put on the entity list. So you have kind of one side does something, the other side reacts, and there's still a lot of unpredictable and sort of uncertainty around it, and hopefully these talks are going to provide us with a little more certainty. Today, I think we're going to hear an announcement on TikTok. Maybe they get to a deal, maybe they don't. We heard from Scott Bessent saying that they were very close to a deal, and he said something interesting. He said that China had some aggressive asks in other areas. So both sides setting out their case very strongly. It's still here in the Palacio de la Cruz behind us. That's the de la Cruz Palace, the Spanish Foreign Ministry. They met with Alvarez here, and I think it's interesting in itself that we're here in Spain. All four meetings have been in Madrid. In Europe, I should say. All four meetings have been in Europe.
You wish, I know you are based here.
I live here, that would be great for me.
You wish that all of them would
I thought, Stockholm was nice. That was a nice trip. Geneva was nice too.
That says a lot, because both sides would like to find a third country, and that is Europe. Yeah, they wouldn't want to do it in America, maybe. Exactly. Not even South America, not Asia, but they would like to come over to Europe. Actually, I was kind of surprised that we would have this round trade talks here in Madrid, because right after the Stockholm trade talks, at the end of July, Scott Bessent went on record saying that they probably would pick a country like Portugal, like Lisbon, the capital, to have another round of trade talks, and then we have this round of trade talks here. So it was like, I think a lot of media were kind of off guard, because
I was surprised myself because
late.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I was surprised myself because, Spain and the United States haven't had a great time over the recent months. The relationship hasn't been great. Spain has been moving away from the United States in certain ways, and closer to China. They've had, economically, over $10 billion worth of investment into Spain from China over the past few years. The Prime Minister here, Pedro Sanchez, is a socialist Prime Minister, very much to the left. He's the leader of a socialist and left-leaning coalition government who is in direct conflict with a lot of the things that the current U.S. administration wants, including angering the U.S. administration and Donald Trump at the last NATO summit, when Trump was pushing for European countries to spend 5% on defense. Spain was the only one to push back on that and say, well, we're not going to spend that much, because if you spend that much on defense, it comes at the expense of other things like education, like health, like schools, like hospitals. So
I think, speaking of that, I think Spain is trying to strike a balance between China and the United States and the European Union. Pedro Sanchez, the Prime Minister of Spain, went to China in April. He said he would like to rebalance his relationship with the European Union. And also, China is a very important trading partner of Spain. Apparently, we're seeing a lot of Chinese cars, BYD. And so, you know what? After his visit to China in April, Scott Bessent...
Third visit in 3 years.
Yeah, I know. And Scott Bessent, the U.S. Treasury Secretary, said countries aligning with China will be risk, in Scott Bessent's words, cutting their own throat. So it was really, really strong rhetoric. That is why it's a little bit surprising they're coming over to Madrid, because they're trying to repair ties with Madrid this time.
Yeah.
And we'll see how they're going to talk it out. I mean, that is also quite interesting point. And of course, Ken, I have a live to do on TV, and I'm going to have to leave you here.
You're going to leave me here?
Yeah, you do great. I know. Yeah.
Thanks, Jianhua. You go and get your live.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Yeah, keep talking, and probably I can join you later after the TV live. Anyways, bye.
Okay.
And bye our viewers on CGTN social media.